"Who authorized this ragged beggar to set foot in here?" That was the sentence Marcus Thorne roared into Lucas Miller's face, right in the middle of the luxurious shareholder meeting room. A single father, his shirt still lingering with the smell of motor oil, treated like trash that needed to be thrown out. In front of them, the only thing Lucas had was a clunky hydraulic press and a drive shaft. No slide deck, no credentials, no backup. And Thorne laughed triumphantly. But just a few seconds later, the entire room went dead silent. A dry crack rang out from the grade A+ steel bar. It shattered exactly at the 3-ton level, just as Lucas had warned. No guessing, no luck. Chillingly accurate. And that was when they realized Lucas was not a nameless mechanic. He was the forgotten chief engineer of Ferrari, the man who understood the soul of metal better than any executive in the room. That press was not a joke. It was proof that a system was killing people, and a $50 million conspiracy was burning the corporation from the inside out. If you were Lucas, would you stay silent to keep your child alive, or stand up, even knowing you would be crushed? Hit subscribe to the channel right now, and leave a comment with your choice. This story does not stop here. The Detroit winter wind whistled through the gaps of the rusted, corrugated iron shutters, carrying the bone-cutting chill characteristic of the Rust Belt. Outside, abandoned factories stood tall like the dry skeletons of a dead industrial era, casting dark silhouettes against the heavy, gray sky. In this dilapidated slum, the howling wind sounded like a mournful wail, creeping into every nook and cranny, signaling a massive blizzard waiting to swallow the city. Nestled amidst that desolation was Rusty's garage, a rundown repair shop where a flickering neon sign was the only sign of life on the entire block. Inside the shop, the air was thick with the smell of burnt motor oil and raw gasoline. An old Ford pickup was roaring madly, its engine vibrating violently like a dying beast in a seizure. Standing next to the truck was a portly man, his face beet red from anger and alcohol, stomping on the gas pedal with all his might. Black smoke spewed from the exhaust, engulfing the cramped space, making visibility blurry and suffocating. Lucas Miller stood there, his coveralls mottled with grease stains, his face grimy, but his eyes as still as a deep lake. He said nothing, silently observing the vehicle being tortured. His silence seemed to further provoke the rude customer. The man released the gas pedal, turning to scream right in Lucas's face, spittle flying along with his vulgar words. "Are you deaf, you backyard mechanic? I told you to fix the idol, not stand there staring like a stone statue. I pay you to work, not to play the scarecrow." The man's shouting mixed with the deafening noise of the engine to create a chaotic, ear-torturing symphony. But Lucas seemed used to it, or perhaps he was trying to push it out of his mind. He walked slowly toward the truck, placing his calloused hands lightly on the scorching hood. The heat from the V8 engine block transmitted through the metal, burning and intense, but Lucas did not pull his hand back. He closed his eyes, tilting his head slightly toward the sound of the machine, focusing every sense on the tiniest vibrations traveling through his fingertips. In the darkness of his closed eyes, Lucas did not see a beat-up truck. He saw pistons moving, camshafts spinning, and the intake airflow circulating. He heard the heartbeat of the machine, and immediately he detected the skipped beat. A tiny deviation, a metallic click that the human ear could not hear amidst the sea of chaotic sound. But to him, it was as clear as a thunderclap. "Stop." Lucas opened his eyes, his voice not loud but so steely and authoritative that it stunned the customer for a moment. He glared at the man, his hand remaining on the hood. "If you don't want a piston to punch through the engine block and turn this pile of scrap into actual scrap, take your foot off the pedal immediately." The customer opened his mouth to curse, but Lucas's cold, sharp gaze made him hesitate. He mumbled a few sounds in his throat, then reluctantly killed the engine. The space suddenly sank into relative silence, leaving only the ticking sound of metal expanding from heat. Lucas offered no long explanation. He walked to the tool cabinet, his hands gliding over rows of tools and stopping at a small wrench. He turned back, popped the hood, the heat blasting into his face. He leaned into the engine bay, eyes narrowing to pinpoint the exact location needing intervention. No dismantling, no complex diagnostic machines. Lucas took the wrench and tapped lightly, exactly once, on the intake valve assembly. Clack! A dry, decisive sound rang out. Lucas stood up straight, wiped his hands on the rag draped over his shoulder, then signaled the customer. "Crank it." The fat man looked at him suspiciously but complied. The starter cranked, and a miracle happened. The insane roaring and shaking from before had vanished completely. In its place was the sound of the engine idling smoothly, steadily, rhythmically, like the breathing of a track athlete at rest. The black smoke from the exhaust thinned out and disappeared. "Stuck intake valve spring. Done. $10, Lucas said coldly, not bothering to look the customer in the eye. He turned away, starting to pack up his tools, considering the transaction concluded. The customer sat in the truck, eyes wide with astonishment. He couldn't believe that with just a light tap, the truck that had been acting up all week was now as obedient as a kitten. Astonishment quickly turned into the extreme excitement of an uneducated man who had just witnessed a magic trick. He jumped out of the truck, laughing boisterously, and in a fit of high spirits, he raised his hand and slammed it hard onto the hood. Wham! The jarring sound of metal on metal rang out, bouncing off the 4 corrugated walls of the garage, creating a terrifying echo that tore apart the newly established quiet. "Amazing. You're a wizard mechanic. I went to 3 garages, and they all said I had to replace the whole carburetor." But the smile on the customer's lips suddenly became distorted in Lucas's eyes. The moment the WHAM rang out, Lucas's face went pale. The blood in his body seemed to freeze. He didn't care about the cheap praise. He threw the wrench onto the ground, rushing toward the darkest corner of the shop, where a small room had been erected with thick, tempered glass. Lucas's eyes were panicked, glued to the inside of that glass room. On the other side of the glass, completely separated from the noise, dust, and filth of the garage, was another world. A boy of about 10, thin with messy hair, was sitting on a blue foam mat. That was Leo. Surrounding the boy were dozens of model cars arranged neatly in order of color and size. When the loud bang on the hood rang out, even though it was soundproofed, the vibration still traveled through the floor. Leo cringed slightly, his small shoulders jerking up once. The boy stopped his hands, eyes opening wide and bewildered, looking out, a look of fear passing through like a ripple. Lucas held his breath, palms pressed tight against the cold glass, mouth mumbling words of reassurance his son couldn't hear. His heart pounded in his chest, terrified that the sound would trigger a panic attack, an emotional outburst that would take him hours to soothe. But fortunately, Leo only paused for a moment. The boy saw his dad standing outside the glass door. His father's anxious gaze seemed to anchor him to reality. Leo looked down, continuing to pick up the red model car, placing it in its correct position in the row. The boy's world returned to a fragile state of balance. Lucas let out a sigh of relief, his whole body leaning against the glass, cold sweat seeping on his forehead, even though the temperature in the shop was freezing. He closed his eyes for a moment to calm his racing heart, then turned to face the customer. The fat man was still laughing and talking loudly, completely unaware of what disaster his thoughtless action had nearly caused. He pulled a crumpled $10 bill from his pocket, balled it up, and threw it on the ground right at Lucas's feet. "Here's yours. Cheer up next time." With a face like a funeral, "No wonder you're just a lowly mechanic." The man spat on the floor, then climbed into his truck, slamming the door again. The engine started up, and the vehicle rolled out of the shop, leaving behind a trail of gray smoke and the strong smell of exhaust. Lucas stood alone in the vast cold garage. The wind blew through the open shutter, carrying the first snowflakes of the season fluttering inside, landing on his dirty shoulders. He looked down at the $10 bill, lying forlornly on the concrete floor, stained with pitch-black oil. He slowly reached out to pick it up. These hands, 10 years ago, were once known as the golden hands of Scuderia Ferrari. Hands that had touched the most exquisite V12 machines on the planet. Hands that automotive tycoons had cherished and paid millions of dollars just for him to nod in agreement to check their engines. Hands that had held prestigious trophies, that had held his wife's hand in boundless happiness. Now, those hands were trembling violently, not from the cold, but from extreme suppression. He squeezed the dirty bill in his hand, fingernails digging into his palm painfully. He accepted this humiliation, accepted bowing his head to people who previously wouldn't have been qualified to carry his shoes, just to exchange for peace for Leo. Lucas looked up outside. Night had fallen completely, swallowing the city of Detroit. The blizzard had truly begun. The wind howled more fiercely, whipping against the corrugated roof of the garage with chilling sounds. A long and harsh night awaited ahead, and in the intuition of a man who had tasted enough of life's bitterness, Lucas knew this storm was not just bringing cold snow. It was bringing something worse, a cruel destiny about to knock on the door of Rusty's garage. The blizzard outside seemed to be unleashing its full fury upon the city of Detroit. White snowflakes were whipped ragged by the wind, flying chaotically through the air like thousands of sharp ice blades, slamming against the fragile corrugated metal walls of Rusty's garage, creating eerie sounds. Inside, Lucas Miller had just finished cleaning up the scattered tools. He shuddered slightly, pulling up the collar of his grease-stained jacket to block the chill seeping into his bones. The clock on the wall showed 11 p.m. By now, he should have closed the shop, turned off the lights, and crawled into the small room in the back to read stories to Leo, putting his son into a peaceful sleep far away from this chaotic world. But fate seemed unwilling to let go of the tormented man. Amidst the howling of the gale, a strange sound suddenly rang out, tearing through the silent night of the slum. It wasn't the loud, dilapidated engine noise of the beat-up trucks common in this area. It was the screeching of high-end rubber tires grinding on wet concrete, the sound of metal scraping against the road surface, sparking fire, along with the sound of a twin-turbo V8 engine growling, painfully, yet still maintaining a deep, luxurious timbre. Lucas frowned, turning his head toward the door. A pair of sharp matrix LED headlights, cold blue like the eyes of a beast, swept through the snow curtain, shining straight into the shop, making him squint. The car limped inside, its shiny black body reflecting the flickering neon lights, looking absurdly out of place and bizarre amidst the scrap and grease of Rusty's garage. It was a Vance Symphony, a luxury sedan line worth $200,000, a symbol of extreme wealth and power that people in this neighborhood probably only dared to look at through TV screens their whole lives. Now, that million-dollar beast lay flattened in the middle of his shop floor, leaning heavily to one side like a severely wounded animal. The driver's side door burst open. A young girl stepped out, stumbling and nearly falling. She was only about 17, wearing a thin designer hoodie soaked with rain, her long matted hair plastered to a face pale from cold and fear. That was Maya. Her pristine white sneakers were submerged in a puddle of black water mixed with oil on the shop floor, but she didn't seem to care. Maya trembled violently, hugging herself tightly to self-soothe, teeth chattering loudly. She looked at Lucas with the eyes of a fawn that had just escaped a hunter's claws only to wander into a wolf's den. Extreme panic was clearly visible in her wide, tear-filled eyes. "Please, help me." Her voice broke, choked with sobs. "My car. I lost control. Please don't call the police. I don't dare call home. Mom will kill me." Lucas stood still, hands still, in his pockets. He looked at the luxury supercar dripping water onto the floor, then looked at the shivering young lady in front of him. A heavy fatigue weighed on his shoulders. He didn't want to get involved in trouble, especially trouble from the upper-class world he had long cast aside. But seeing her wretched state and the naked fear in her eyes, a bit of fatherly conscience rose within him. He couldn't kick a child out into a blizzard at midnight like this, no matter whose child she was. "Give me the keys," Lucas said, his voice deep and concise, devoid of emotion. Maya hurriedly fished a leather-wrapped smart key from her pocket, placing it into his extended, calloused hand. Lucas took it, feeling the exquisite and expensive nature of the small object. He jerked his chin toward the old wooden chair placed in the corner of the wall, the most sheltered spot in the shop. "Go sit in there and stay quiet. Absolutely do not make a sound." He led Maya toward that spot where Leo's soundproof glass room was located. Passing by, Maya glanced curiously through the thick glass. She saw a boy, about her younger brother's age, sitting engrossed in arranging model cars, completely separated from the outside world. The soft yellow light emanating from the room created a strangely peaceful scene, contrasting completely with the cold and chaos outside. Lucas noticed Maya's gaze. He stopped, lowering his voice to a whisper but full of threat. "That's my son. He's sleeping. If you wake him up or scare him, I'll kick you out onto the street immediately." Understand? Maya nodded repeatedly, huddled fearfully on the wooden chair, arms still hugging herself tight. Lucas looked at her once more to ensure she would behave, then turned his back, grabbing a specialized flashlight, and stepped out into the snowy rain. The bone-chilling cold hit immediately as Lucas stepped out from under the shop's awning to check the front of the car. Sleet whipped painfully against his face, cold water soaking through his protective clothing, seeping into his flesh. He switched on the flashlight, the beam of blue-white light cutting through the night, illuminating the front left wheel of the Vance Symphony clearly. The scene before him was pathetic. The expensive run-flat tire had been shredded, leaving only strips of tattered rubber hanging from the dented and deformed titanium alloy rim. Clearly, the girl had hit the curb at high speed. To a normal mechanic, this was just a simple tire change and rim straightening job. Just 30 minutes, and it would be done. He could get rid of this trouble and return to Leo. Lucas clicked his tongue, intending to go back in to get the hydraulic jack, but then his steps faltered. Something wasn't right. The instinct of a former Scuderia Ferrari chief race engineer, someone who had once been responsible for the lives of legendary racers at speeds of 300 kilometers per hour, suddenly sounded an alarm. He turned back, shining the flashlight more carefully into the wheel well. The angle of the wheel's impact with the curb looked strange. If it were merely a loss of control due to slippery roads, the impact force would be focused on the outer face of the tire. But here, the abrasion marks on the rim showed that the wheel had tilted at a deadly angle before the collision occurred. Lucas narrowed his professional eyes. He didn't hesitate to lie flat on the soaked, freezing concrete floor. Dirty water and oil seeped right into his chest, chilling him to the heart, but he didn't care. He shimmied under the car, shining the flashlight up at the suspension system. Under the flashlight beam, the chassis system of the Vance Symphony appeared as a technological masterpiece. Shiny aluminum alloy control arms, complex electronic air suspension. Everything exuded flashiness and expense. But Lucas wasn't deceived by the exterior. He raised his left hand, rough but extremely sensitive fingers tracing along the steering axle, painted in glossy electrostatic black. He closed his eyes, repeating the old habit, feeling. His fingertips glided over the cold metal surface, smooth, perfect. But when reaching the middle section of the steering axle, where the torsional force is greatest when cornering, his finger paused. A slight ripple, very small, so small that the naked eye would struggle to see it without a microscope, and a normal person's hand would glide over it without noticing. But for Lucas, who could sense camshaft deviation with just a light touch, that small ripple was like an ugly keloid scar. "What the hell is this?" Lucas muttered, his heart starting to beat faster. He opened his eyes, pressing the flashlight close to where his finger had stopped. He used his thumbnail to scrape lightly at the black paint. The paint peeled off easily, revealing the dull gray metal surface underneath, and there, running along the shaft body, was a crack thin as a hair. That was not an impact crack. An impact crack would be clean, sharp-edged, and originate from the stress point. This crack, it curved softly, creeping from inside the metal core out to the surface. It looked like a crack on ceramic glaze when fired at the wrong temperature. Lucas shuddered, a chill running down his spine, colder than the blizzard outside. He realized the terrifying truth lying right before his eyes. This steering axle didn't break because of tonight's accident. Tonight's accident happened because this steering axle had begun to destroy itself. This was a material defect, a deadly flaw, right from the foundry. There were air bubbles or impurities deep within the steel core, creating invisible weak points. The flashy paint on the outside was just a curtain covering a rotting glass skeleton inside. This $200,000 car, the pride of the upper class, was actually a mobile coffin. It was running on a part that could shatter at any moment, especially when the car reached high speeds on the highway. If it hadn't rained tonight, if this girl Maya had dared to push the pedal to 60 miles per hour, then the thing shattering wouldn't be just the tire, but the entire car, and the girl's life along with it. Lucas lay there, under the supercar, his breath puffing out white smoke in the biting cold. He realized he was holding a terrible secret, proof of negligence, or worse, fraud, of a giant industrial empire. And more importantly, he knew that tonight, he couldn't simply change the tire and send this girl home anymore. Darkness enveloped Rusty's garage, leaving only the pale light from the street lamp filtering through the door cracks and the flickering blue glare from the corner of the shop where Lucas was working. He pulled the welding mask down to cover his face, his right hand holding the TIG torch, his left hand gripping the steering axle tightly with locking pliers. The crackling sound of the electric arc rang out, tearing through the silent night, shooting out bright sparks like fireworks, falling onto the oil-soaked concrete floor. The acrid smell of burnt metal mixed with the pungent scent of ozone rose up, invading the senses. But Lucas didn't care. He was intensely focused, pouring all his senses into the welding tip, melting at thousands of degrees Celsius. To a normal engineer, welding a microcrack on a load-bearing steering axle was a taboo, a reckless act of madness. But Lucas was not a normal engineer. He was the man who had calculated the thermal expansion of Ferrari pistons in split seconds in the heat of a race. He knew exactly the temperature needed to melt the outer steel shell without altering the inner metal structure too much. He was performing emergency surgery on a dying patient, trying to hold on to life for the car for a few dozen more miles. Drop by drop, molten metal dripped down, filling the hair-thin but deadly crack. Lucas moved the welding torch with the precision of a neurosurgeon, creating a small, neat, and solid weld seam running along the axle's weak point. This was not a permanent solution. He knew that. Once the core structure had air pockets, fracture was only a matter of time. But at least this weld would act as a splint, keeping the car's spine from collapsing immediately before the girl, Maya, could get home safely. 15 minutes passed, sweat pouring like a bath under the thick protective gear. Lucas turned off the welding machine, pushing the mask up to his forehead. He exhaled, looking at his work. The crack was covered, temporarily reinforced. He reached for a can of black spray paint, coating a thin layer over the weld to hide the traces of crude repair, returning a fake polished look to the steering axle. But technical satisfaction was quickly replaced by anger flaring in his chest. Lucas stood up, throwing the pliers hard onto the floor, creating a jarring clang. He stared at the shiny chrome-plated stylized V logo on the car's steering wheel. Vance Motors, the name representing luxury, safety, and class. Yet they dared to sell a defective product, a mobile coffin wrapped in velvet and premium leather. They were gambling with customers' lives just to save costs on metal casting. This negligence, to a person who worshipped mechanical perfection like Lucas, was an unforgivable insult. He couldn't just stay silent. He needed to send a message, not to the innocent girl shivering in there, but to those behind this lie. Lucas walked to the messy workbench, snatching up a grease-stained notebook. He pulled a ballpoint pen from his chest pocket, the tip pressing hard onto the yellowed white paper, indenting sharp, angular strokes, full of fury. "Do not drive over 40 miles per hour." He muttered the words he just wrote, hand not stopping yet. He wanted every word to be valuable, heavy enough to awaken the conscience, or at least the fear, of the reader. "Front axle is repainted scrap," Lucas wrote on, the pen strokes seemingly wanting to tear the paper surface. He didn't use flowery technical terms. He used the language of naked truth. Ask the dealer if they intended to kill you or just wanted to save a few bucks. Finished writing, he tore the paper from the notebook with a decisive motion. Lucas returned to the car, opening the driver's door. He didn't throw the paper on the seat or stuff it in the glove box. He clamped it right in the middle of the steering wheel, where anyone sitting in the driver's seat would be forced to see it first. The white paper, smudged with oil stains, stood out amidst the luxurious cream leather interior like a stain, a stern and undeniable accusation. Job done? Lucas took a deep breath to readjust his emotions, trying to hide the anger inside. He needed to return to the role of an emotionless mechanic, a hired hand only interested in money, to get rid of this uninvited guest as soon as possible. The presence of this car and this girl here for too long was a threat to Leo's peace. Lucas walked into the office area, where warm yellow light spilled out from the glass room. Maya was still huddled on the old wooden chair, eyes red from crying, her gaze glued to the boy Leo, sitting arranging models inside the glass cage. Seeing Lucas enter with a sullen face, Maya started and stood up, anxiety clearly visible on her youthful face. My car, how is it?" she stammered, voice trembling. Lucas didn't answer immediately. He walked to the hook on the wall, took the expensive smart key, then tossed it toward Maya. She clumsily caught it, almost dropping it. "It's done," Lucas said curtly. walking to the table to get the hand cleaner bottle, trying to scrub away the black grease stains on his fingers. $20. Maya opened her eyes wide at him. Surprise, overwhelming even fear. She had prepared herself to hear a figure in the hundreds, even thousands of dollars. She knew the value of this car, and she also knew how garages often ripped off luxury cars, especially in the middle of a blizzard night. Just that much? Maya stammered, her hand feeling for her wallet in her hoodie pocket. But this is the latest Vance model. What did you do? Are you sure it's okay? Lucas stopped wiping his hands. He turned to look at Maya, his gaze cold and distant, creating an invisible wall separating the two worlds. I changed the spare tire and reinforced the steering axle. It's enough for you to get home, if you listen and read the note I left on the steering wheel carefully, he said, voice even and devoid of emotion. As for the price, here I sell labor, not brand names. $20 for the tire, change labor, and welding materials. Maya pulled out a crisp $20 bill, timidly placing it on the dirty table surface. She looked at Lucas with eyes full of gratitude, mixed with curiosity. This man was too different from what she imagined a slum mechanic to be. He had a strange aura, both frightening and trustworthy. Thank you. Really, thank you, Maya murmured. Can I have your phone number? So, later if? No. Lucas cut her off immediately, his voice hardening, sharp as a hammer striking metal. He stepped forward, opening the office door leading out of the shop, wide, cold wind, instantly rushing in. Go home, kid. It's very cold out there, and never come back here. The harsh dismissal stunned Maya. She looked at Lucas, then looked at the glass room where Leo was still engrossed in his own world, completely unaware of this brief encounter. Maya understood. She wasn't welcome. She bowed her head to him once, then hurriedly ran to the car, fleeing the coldness of the strange mechanic. The sound of the V8 engine starting rang out, deep and powerful. The Vance Symphony slowly backed out of the shop, two red taillights like demonic eyes receding into the pitch-black night. The sound of tires grinding on gravel faded away, then disappeared completely, returning the inherent quiet to Rusty's garage. Lucas stood leaning his shoulder against the iron door frame, eyes following the direction the car had just disappeared. The cold wind blew his messy hair, snowflakes falling onto his shoulders, but he stood motionless as a statue. The intuition of a former Ferrari chief race engineer who had lived amidst the schemes and calculations of the upper class was screaming in his mind. He knew people like the Vance family well. They wouldn't let this go. That note was not just a safety warning for a teenage girl. It was a slap straight in the face of a proud industrial empire. It was a declaration of war, sent from a nobody at the bottom of society to those reigning at the peak of power. Lucas turned his head back, looking into the glass room where Leo was safe and peaceful. A vague anxiety began to creep into his heart. He had just lit the fuse of a bomb, and he knew, when it exploded, its destructive power wouldn't just stop at this garage gate. The real trouble was only just beginning. Morning in the Detroit slums often began with a palette of bleak, drab grays. Fog mixed with industrial smog hung low over the ground, enveloping the rows of crooked houses in a gloomy, deadly, silent atmosphere. Lucas Miller woke early as usual. He had finished checking the ventilation system for Leo's glass room and was busy scrubbing the grease stains left on the floor from the night before. That fragile piece was the most precious asset he tried to preserve every day, but today it was brutally stripped away. From the head of the deserted street, the deep roar of high-performance engines rang out, shattering the early morning silence. Not the sputtering pops of the familiar dilapidated delivery trucks, but the synchronized, powerful, and menacing sound of a mechanized convoy. Lucas stopped his work, stood up straight, and squinted toward the wide-open main door. A convoy of glossy black Cadillac Escalade SUVs, looming like mobile fortresses, thundered into the narrow alley leading to Rusty's garage. Moving in tactical formation, blocking every escape route, they simultaneously screeched to a halt in front of the shop, surrounding the garage's small frontage like a high-level criminal takedown. The weak morning sunlight reflected off the pitch-black paint and shiny chrome details of the convoy, creating a stark contrast with the ragged, filthy appearance of the repair shop. Their arrival felt like an invasion, an arrogant declaration of sovereignty by the upper class, over the land of the destitute. The door of the lead vehicle burst open. Men in black suits and sunglasses, wearing earpieces, stepped out swiftly. They lined up, forming a solid wall of people, separating the outside world from the VIP sitting in the car. A tense, stifling atmosphere enveloped the space. From the central vehicle, a woman stepped out. It was Olivia Vance. She wasn't wearing the glamorous evening gowns seen in fashion magazines, but a bespoke ash-gray suit, sharply tailored to hug her slender yet authoritative figure. Her blonde hair was tied up in a neat bun, revealing a flawless, cold face. She stood there for a moment, adjusting her lapel, her gaze sweeping over the Rusty's Garage sign, swinging in the wind with undisguised disdain. Then she began to walk. Her red-soled Christian Louboutin heels struck the cracked concrete of the garage floor, creating sharp, rhythmic, and echoing clack sounds. Every step exuded the oppressive aura of someone used to commanding, a queen entering a subject's territory to punish insolence. She walked straight in, not bothering to look at the scrap piles or oil stains, as if her presence alone was enough to repel all filth away from her. Lucas stood next to the cluttered workbench, holding a rag. He showed no fear or subservience. He simply watched the most powerful woman in the automotive industry advancing toward him with the attitude of an impending storm. He knew who she was, and he knew why she was here. Olivia stopped in front of Lucas. The only distance between them was the dusty old wooden table. She offered no greeting, nor did she bother to introduce herself. Her long, manicured hand pulled a crumpled, grease-stained piece of paper from her suit pocket. Bam! She slammed the paper onto the table. Dust flew up. It was the note Lucas had clamped onto Maya's steering wheel the night before. His angry, scrawled words now lay exposed in the daylight, becoming evidence of an uneven confrontation. "Are you the author of this trash?" Olivia's voice rang out, cold and sharp as a scalpel. She looked at Lucas with a scrutinizing, assessing gaze, trying to find signs of fraud or blackmail on the rugged man's face. In her eyes, he was just a sloppy backyard mechanic, a failure trying to cash in on her daughter's panic. Lucas looked down at the paper, then leisurely continued wiping the oil from his hands. He looked up, meeting Olivia's fiery gaze with strange indifference. "Yes," he answered briefly, voice deep and murky. "Is there a problem?" Lucas's calm attitude was like pouring oil on fire. Olivia sneered, a smirk appearing on her lips. She had never been answered with such a challenging tone by anyone, especially someone from such a lowly class. "A problem?" Olivia gritted out, planting both hands on the table, leaning forward to increase the pressure. "The problem is that you are slandering the honor of Vance Motors. You dare use your cheap pen and patched-up knowledge to call my $200,000 mechanical masterpiece scrap? Do you know who you are talking to?" The air in the shop thickened. The bodyguards behind Olivia shifted slightly, hands resting loosely on their belts, ready to intervene if the mechanic made any sudden move. But Lucas made no sudden moves. He tossed the rag aside, walked around the table, and approached Olivia. He didn't back down before her aura of power. On the contrary, his presence carried an invisible weight, the weight of truth and experience. "I know who you are, Mrs. Vance," Lucas said, his voice still even but containing steeliness. "You are the one selling armored dreams. But last night, that dream almost became a nightmare for your daughter." He looked straight into Olivia's wide, angry eyes, continuing to attack her blind pride. "You should feel lucky it stormed last night. That rain saved the girl's life, made her afraid to drive fast. Because if it had been dry, and if she had pushed the pedal to touch 60 miles per hour, Lucas paused for a moment, letting his words seep into the other's mind. He pointed toward the shop door, where the highway ran past the city. Then the thing shattering on the highway wouldn't just be the cheap lead-alloy steering axle. It would be the entire car, your daughter's life, and the future of the empire you are so proud of. Lucas's words were like sledgehammer blows to Olivia's pride. She stood frozen, breathing heavily. She had prepared legal threats and technical figures to crush this mechanic, but she hadn't expected him to dare flip the script and attack a mother's conscience directly. However, the self-defense instinct of a seasoned CEO didn't allow her to believe baseless accusations from a nobody. She believed in processes, in inspection reports, and in her million-dollar engineering team more than the words of a slum mechanic. Anger transformed into extreme contempt. Olivia stood up straight, smoothing her suit jacket. She looked at Lucas like looking at an insect trying to bite a giant's heel. "Well said," Olivia sneered, a cold and bone-chillingly cruel smile. "A perfect script for blackmail. Create fear, then play the savior hero to extort money. But you chose the wrong target, mechanic." She turned around, snapping her fingers decisively toward the bodyguards lining the door. "Bring it in." At her command, the two largest bodyguards broke rank and stepped forward. In their hands, they heavily carried a long object, wrapped tightly in a luxurious crimson velvet cloth. They walked into the shop, placing the object on Lucas's grease-stained workbench with reverence, as if offering a royal treasure. Olivia placed her hand on the velvet cloth, her eyes flashing the triumphant look of someone preparing to deliver the finishing blow. She believed that what lay beneath this cloth would be undeniable proof to send this scammer mechanic to jail, or at least make him shut up and kneel in apology. Two large bodyguards, wearing black sunglasses that covered half their faces, stepped forward with heavy strides, carrying the pressure of pre-programmed war machines. They placed the long object wrapped tightly in crimson velvet onto Lucas's grease-stained workbench. The appearance of that brilliant, soft, and luxurious red velvet cloth lay incongruously amidst rusted wrenches, spanners, and streaks of pitch-black oil, creating a jarring contrast, as if a piece of royal jewelry had been mistakenly thrown into a dump. Olivia Vance stood there, arms crossed, her eyes exuding the absolute confidence of someone holding the truth. She stepped close to the table, her slender hand grasping the edge of the velvet cloth. With a decisive and dramatic motion, like a magician preparing to unveil the greatest act, she yanked the cloth away. Whoosh! The velvet cloth fell onto the dirty concrete floor, revealing the object inside. It was a brand new steering axle. Under the flickering neon light of the shop, its glossy black electrostatic paint reflected light, sparkling like a giant black pearl. The metal surface was smooth, scratch-free, flawless, so perfect one could use it as a mirror. The joints were exquisitely machined, the galvanized screws shining brightly. It lay there, exuding the cold and authoritative beauty of top-tier modern mechanical technology. "Open your eyes and look closely," Olivia's voice rang out, full of pride and challenge. She ran her finger along the body of the steering axle, feeling the smoothness of the premium paint. "This is a steering axle taken directly from the production line of the Vance Motors factory this morning. It has never rolled on a road, never been exposed to the environment. It is the standard." She turned to look at Lucas, her eyes sharp as daggers, stabbing straight into his face. "My technical director, Marcus Thorne, who has 30 years of experience in metallurgy and is one of the world's leading experts, personally inspected this batch. He confirmed with certainty that this is grade A+ tempered steel, the best, most durable, and most expensive steel the automotive industry has ever known." Lucas remained still, his eyes glued to the shiny steering axle on the table. He showed no awe before that flashy beauty. On the contrary, the corner of his mouth quirked up slightly, a faint smile but filled with discreet sarcasm. He saw what Olivia did not see. He saw the falseness wrapped in a perfect shell. Seeing Lucas silent, Olivia pushed further. She believed his silence was a sign of weakness and fear. She stepped closer to him, poking her elaborately manicured index finger into the chest of his grease-stained protective shirt. "Marcus Thorne told me about people like you." Olivia gritted out each word, her voice containing extreme contempt. "He said, you are a backyard mechanic, a failure who specializes in scamming the gullible. He said, you fabricated that so-called technical error to scare a panicked 17-year-old girl, aiming to extort maintenance fees or blackmail the corporation." Her accusation was as heavy as a rock, crushing down on the cramped space of the garage. She was not only doubting his ability, she was insulting his character. She considered him a parasite, exploiting others' accidents for profit. "Who do you think you are?" Olivia raised her voice, her shout echoing off the four corrugated walls. "A $10 car fixer in a Detroit slum, crawling under beat-up trucks every day, daring to lecture Vance Motors on metallurgy? What credentials do you have? Do you have $1 million lab? Or do you just have a rusty welding torch and the sick imagination of a destitute man? Lucas looked at her, then looked down at the glittering steering axle on the table. His eyes darkened. Not out of fear of this woman's power, nor out of shame for his current background. He was angry, a simmering anger, hot as glowing coals in a furnace, flaring up before the ignorance and blindness wrapped in velvet. He was angry because people sitting high up like her and Thorne were willing to use flowery words, flashy titles, to cover up the deadly truth. They disregarded human life, disregarded basic physical principles just to protect their megalomaniacal egos and their profits. You believe him? Lucas spoke up, his voice deep and cold, cutting through Olivia's barrage of insults. He looked up, looking straight into her eyes. His gaze was deep and steadfast, like a reef in the ocean. You believe the guy sitting in an air-conditioned room, signing papers and never really touching machine oil, more than you believe in physics? You believe in the grade A+ label printed on paper, more than you believe in the actual structure of the metal? His question bored deep into Olivia's blind confidence. She paused for a moment, but pride did not allow her to back down. She was a CEO. She managed people by process and belief in hierarchy. To her, the word of a technical director carried 1,000 times more weight than the word of a nameless mechanic. I believe in the million-dollar inspection process we have built over the past 50 years, Olivia retorted fiercely, planting both hands on the table, facing Lucas at close range. I don't believe in your filthy, grease-stained hands and vague intuition. Science is data, is measuring machines, not the feeling of touch of an amateur. She stood up straight, delivering the final punishment blow. Prove you are right now, right here. If you cannot point out the fault on this perfect steering axle, I will sue you for slander and extortion. I will bankrupt you, close down this ragged garage, and rot you in jail. Do you hear me clearly? Olivia's threat hung in the air like a guillotine blade. The bodyguards behind her sneered, waiting for the mechanic's kneeling plea for mercy. They were too used to seeing the powerless tremble and collapse before the power of the Vance mistress. But Lucas did not tremble, nor did he argue another word. He realized that words had become meaningless to those who only worshipped papers and numbers. It was time to let the metal speak for itself. Lucas silently turned his back, walking toward the old tool cabinet against the wall. The sound of his shoe soles rubbing lightly on the concrete floor created monotonous, shuffling noises. Olivia watched, her delicate brows furrowed in suspicion. She waited for him to pull out some complex measuring machine or at least a handheld ultrasonic scanner. But no, Lucas rummaged in a messy drawer, metal clanking against metal. His hand glided past shiny wrenches, large bolt cutters, and stopped in a hidden corner. He grasped the worn wooden handle of a small tool. He pulled it out. It was a hammer, not a sledgehammer used for demolition, nor a rubber mallet used for tires. It was a small ball-peen hammer, an old type with a metal head darkened by time, and a wooden handle polished by the mechanic's hand sweat. A crude, cheap, and ridiculously mediocre tool. When placed next to the high-tech machines of Vance Motors, Lucas held the hammer in his hand, rotating his wrist slightly to feel its familiar weight. He turned around, walking slowly toward the table, toward the grade A+ steering axle lying proudly on it. Olivia frowned, confusion clear on her face. She couldn't believe her eyes. What did he intend to do with that toy hammer? Smash it in despair? Or did he plan to attack her? The bodyguards immediately tensed, hands on the holsters at their waists, ready to rush in and subdue. But Lucas didn't seem reckless. His steps were calm, rhythmic. He walked up in front of Olivia, but his eyes didn't look at her anymore. He looked at the steering axle. In his eyes at this moment, it was not an inanimate block of metal. It was a piece of music with errors, and he was the only conductor who heard that false note. He raised the hammer high. The space in the shop seemed to freeze. The whistling wind outside seemed to die down too. Olivia held her breath, eyes wide, staring at the mechanic's bizarre action. She didn't know that the hammer strike about to come would not only create a physical sound, it would be the death knell for her arrogance, and would decide the fate of a mighty automotive empire. The air inside the garage seemed to be sucked dry, leaving a heavy and suffocating silence blanketing everything. The old neon lights on the ceiling flickered intermittently, casting patchy streaks of light onto the grease-stained concrete floor, creating a bizarre stage for this uneven confrontation. On one side was Olivia, the powerful woman in a bespoke, wrinkle-free suit, representing the precision and perfection of the upper class. On the other was Lucas, the mechanic in grimy coveralls, hands blackened and calloused, representing the most naked and rough aspects of life. On the cluttered workbench, strewn with wrenches and screws, the shiny steel steering axle lay like an innocent piece of evidence. Lucas held a small, specialized hammer, one with a brass head and a wooden handle worn smooth by years of friction. He didn't rush into action, but spent a few seconds observing the metal surface, his gaze seemingly wanting to pierce through the flashy outer shell to penetrate the very soul of the object. Lucas tapped lightly on the axle head. Ping! A clear, high-pitched sound rang out, resonating in the cramped space before dissolving into nothingness. It was the song of homogeneous metal, the feedback of tightly bonded steel molecules. Lucas tilted his head to listen to the echo, his face showing no emotion. He continued moving the hammerhead down about 10 centimeters. Ping! Still that same sound, sharp and cold. The vibration frequency transmitted through the handle to Lucas's hand signaled stability in the upper part of the steering axle. Olivia stood with arms crossed, her heel tapping a rhythm of impatience on the floor. She was too used to 100-page technical reports, data analysis charts on modern computer screens, not the crude hammer game of a backyard mechanic. Lucas's silence, and the way he intently listened to the metal, made her feel like time was being wastefully squandered. Is this farce over yet? Olivia spoke up, her voice full of sarcasm and condescension. She glanced at her watch, silently calculating how many thousands of dollars she lost for every minute standing in this filthy place. Lucas didn't answer at all. He seemed to have detached himself from her presence, leaving only him and the lifeless steel bar before him. He moved the hammerhead to the most critical point of the steering axle, the place bearing the greatest torsional force when cornering, also the place most prone to fracture if the structure was substandard. His wrist swung gently, but decisively. Thud. There was no clear resonance. A dull, dead sound rang out, brief and crude, like someone punching a wet sandbag. It was completely different, alien, and terrifying compared to the previous 2 taps. That sound didn't travel far, but seemed to be swallowed immediately inside the steel core. The space in the garage seemed to freeze. Lucas held his pose, the hammerhead still resting lightly on the point just struck, his eyes narrowing dangerously. He turned to look at Olivia, and this time, the old mechanic's gaze held no resignation or indifference. In the depths of those eyes was the burning fire of outrage, the look of a true craftsman witnessing an insult to his trade and human life. "Do you hear that?" Lucas's voice was low but resonant, each word like a drill, boring deep into the listener's mind. "That is the sound of death." Olivia frowned slightly, initial annoyance giving way to a flicker of confusion. She wasn't a complete outsider. She understood cars, but she had never heard anyone call a mechanical noise the sound of death. Lucas pointed the hammer at the final strike point, his voice hardening. "There are air bubbles in the metal core. The molecular structure here is hollow, like the bones of an old person with osteoporosis. You are using grade C recycled steel mixed with lead to cast load-bearing components. The outside is chrome-plated to fool the naked eye, but the inside is rotten." He paused a moment, letting that brutal truth soak into the air, then continued with a cold figure. "You save $50 per car in exchange for the customer's life. When the car runs at 120 kilometers per hour and hits a sharp turn, the torsional force will snap this hollow shaft immediately. The car will lose control, flip over, and the person inside will never have the chance to go home for dinner." Lucas threw the hammer onto the table. Clack! The dry impact of the hammer on the wooden table was like a full stop to all excuses. Lucas wiped his hands on an oily rag, turning his back, not bothering to look at the powerful woman's reaction behind him. To him, the verdict had been delivered, and there was nothing more to argue. Olivia stood stunned, her carefully made-up face suddenly turning pale. She stared at the steering axle, then looked at Lucas. The arrogant confidence, the cold shell of a steely businesswoman shattered in large chunks. She was in the industry, trained at prestigious universities. She knew what that sound meant. Memories of old lectures from her student days suddenly rushed back to Olivia about a classic material testing technique called sound resonance. It was a manual method, requiring the craftsman to have extremely sensitive hearing and decades of accumulated experience to distinguish even the slightest change in vibration frequency. In the age of ultrasonic scanners and X-rays, this technique had been forgotten, considered obsolete. But today, right in this shabby garage, it proved the absolute power of naked truth. That dull thud kept ringing in her ears like a stern accusation. It not only exposed the poor quality of the steel bar, but also exposed a system of deception creeping within her own corporation. The standard quality reports, the committed nods of the production director, all were lies. They had deceived her, trading customer safety for profits and bonuses, and she, with her arrogance, had blindly believed in paper numbers rather than reality. Olivia felt a cold chill run down her spine. If Lucas hadn't discovered this, if this batch of thousands of cars had been shipped, disaster would strike. The reputation her family had built for generations would collapse, and worse, the blood of innocent people would spill. She looked at Lucas, but this time her gaze had changed completely. She no longer saw a grimy, countrified, and stubborn mechanic. The image of the man standing with his back to her, broad shoulders and solid posture, suddenly became unusually tall. In Olivia's eyes at this moment, Lucas appeared as a seasoned mechanical master, a holder of the metal's soul, the only person capable of hearing the voice of machines without any modern equipment. That was the sharp weapon she was desperately seeking. She needed someone not blinded by money, not corrupted by power, someone who dared to throw a hammer on the table and tell the brutal truth straight to her face. She needed a scalpel to excise the cancerous tumors gnawing at her empire, and that knife was standing right in front of her, in grease-stained protective gear. Olivia took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She took a step toward Lucas, her heel no longer tapping arrogantly, but becoming cautious. She knew, from the moment the hammer of truth rang out, the balance of power had shifted. She was no longer the one bestowing favors. She was the one needing help. And the only person who could help her right now, ironically, was the person she had intended to ruin just minutes ago. The space inside the repair shop seemed suspended in time after the dry impact of the steel bar against the tabletop. Dust motes, floating in the shaft of light, beaming through the window crack, appeared to stop moving. Silence enveloped everything, heavy and thick, completely swallowing the echo of the fracturing metal just now. Olivia Vance stood there, her usually sharp eyes now softened, replaced by a look full of contemplation and re-evaluation of the entire reality before her. She no longer saw a grimy mechanic with a reckless attitude. Before her now was a master, a man holding a power that her money had thus far failed to buy. That power was truth. She slowly opened her expensive crocodile leather handbag, every movement exuding nobility, but no longer the initial condescension. Olivia pulled out a velvet-covered checkbook and a solid gold fountain pen, placing them gently on the scratched wooden table surface. The sound of the nib touching paper rustled, the only sound breaking the silence, sounding both powerful and full of temptation. "I don't know what tragedy pushed a genius like you into this corner." Olivia's voice lowered, resonating within the four oil-stained walls. Her words no longer carried the tone of command, but the nuance of a sincere recruitment, mixed with a bit of curiosity about the mysterious past of the man opposite. "But for a talent like yours to bury your skills here, fixing a few tractors is a cruel waste of creation." She gently tore the check from the book, sliding it across the table toward Lucas. That flimsy piece of paper carried the weight of a fortune. It lay silent next to black wrenches and spanners, creating a jarringly bright contrast. On the line for the amount, Olivia had left it blank. It was a blank check. "Vance Motors is rotting," Olivia admitted, her gaze looking straight at Lucas without flinching. This was the first time she dared say this to a stranger, but the recent event had shattered all her illusions about the empire she ruled. "Those surrounding me only know how to nod and flatter. I need someone who dares to speak the truth, someone with ears that can hear the soul of machines like you. Write any number you want. $1 million? $2 million? Or do you want stock? I can meet it all?" Lucas looked down at the check. The numbers were not present on it, but he understood its value perfectly. It was a pass back to the world he once belonged to, the world of fiery racetracks, of proudly roaring engines, and of wealth and riches. For a brief moment, his eyes flickered with a waver. He thought of better meals for his son, better clothes, and a house that didn't leak every time it stormed. But then, the light of that ambition extinguished as quickly as it had kindled. He didn't answer immediately, but slowly turned his head toward the darkest corner of the shop. There, nestled amidst piles of old spare parts, was a strange structure that Lucas had spent a whole year building by hand. It was a small room assembled from thick, tempered glass panels, sealed tight with specialized soundproofing rubber gaskets. Inside that glass cage, under warm and gentle yellow light, Leo was sitting arranging model cars neatly in a straight line. The world inside that glass cage was completely separated from the dust, grease, and especially separated from all the chaotic noise of this repair shop. Leo was completely immersed in his own world, his face exuding an unusually peaceful look, completely unaware of the tense confrontation taking place just a few meters away. That was the safe shelter the father had poured all his heart into creating, the only place to help Leo stay away from the jarring sounds that could make the boy panic and suffer. Lucas turned back, gently pushing the check back toward Olivia. His gesture was soft but decisive. Just as when he hammered the fate of the steering axle, he shook his head firmly, eyes shining with the resolve of a father who had clearly defined his life's purpose. "Do you see my son?" Lucas jerked his chin toward the glass room, his voice deep and containing a profound sentiment. "He has autism and is extremely sensitive to sound. He can't stand the noise of the world out there. Car horns, loud talking, even the roaring engines of the supercars you are proud of cause him pain like needles pricking his brain." He stepped closer to the glass, placing his calloused hand on the cold surface, gazing lovingly at his little son inside. "I work in this shabby shop, take these hard manual jobs, not because I have no other choice. I am here because this is the only place that allows me to work while keeping him in my sight, and most importantly, I can control the sound around him." Lucas turned around, facing the most powerful female billionaire in the automotive industry, but his posture at this moment was taller and more majestic than hers. "If I come to work for you, where would I put Leo? Hand him over to a maid, or lock him in a large but cold mansion? Your money can buy the truth about the steering axles, but it cannot buy peace in my son's soul." His voice rang out solidly, each word nailing into the space. "I don't need your money. I need peace for Leo. That is the only thing I care about right now." Olivia stood silent. She had prepared for every situation: greed, bargaining, or even refusal to raise the price. But she had never prepared for a reason like this. She looked deep into the eyes of the man before her, seeing in them not stupidity or arrogance, but immense love, and the silent sacrifice of a father spreading his wings to protect his weak child. The image of Lucas standing guard in front of the glass room, protecting Leo's small world from the invasion of money and fame, made Olivia feel a strong tremor in her chest. That was respect. She nodded slightly, a slow and respectful nod. Olivia didn't say another word to persuade or force. She understood that in front of this man, all her power and assets became meaningless. She took back the check, clipped it into the book, and put it in her handbag. That action took place in solemn silence. Olivia turned her back, walking out of the garage with a completely different mindset than when she entered. She didn't leave as a failure, but as someone who had just learned a precious lesson about the true value of life. The shiny black convoy slowly rolled away, leaving behind the dilapidated repair shop on the side of the highway. Lucas stood watching until the last car disappeared completely behind the dusty haze. He sighed in relief, turning back to look at Leo, still engrossed with the car models, silently thankful that the peaceful life of father and son remained intact. But Lucas did not know that his blunt refusal today, though stemming from the purest love, had accidentally activated another time bomb. Olivia Vance was not one to give up easily, and her appearance here had alerted the dark forces hiding in the shadows of the Vance Motors Corporation, those who would not leave anyone holding the secret of this empire's rot in peace, whether that person wanted it or not. While the stifling heat and smell of motor oil still lingered around Lucas's old garage in the suburbs, in the city center, on the 50th floor of the Vance Tower skyscraper, The atmosphere bore a completely opposite hue. The temperature here was always maintained at a cold and sterile 22 degrees Celsius, completely separated from the dust of the world below. The office of Marcus Thorne, production director of Vance Motors, was vast, with 3 walls of tempered glass, overlooking the panoramic, bustling metropolis. But right now, the owner of that room had no mind to enjoy that million-dollar view. Marcus Thorne threw the black file folder onto the polished ebony desk. The impact wasn't loud, but in the absolute silence of the office, it sounded like a gunshot. He stood leaning his hands on the desk, breathing heavily, his face usually maintaining a fake calm, now twisted with rage and extreme confusion. The news just reported by his close assistant was like a slap straight to his face. He refused a blank check? In that slum? Thorne hissed through his teeth, eyes narrowing in disbelief. He couldn't believe his ears. In Thorne's worldview, reeking of money and power, everything and everyone had a price. He had used money to bribe inspection officials, used money to silence dissenting employees, and used money to climb to his current position. A lowly car mechanic, living huddled in a dilapidated garage with a sick child, dared to push back a blank check from Olivia Vance? This was unthinkable. It broke every rule Thorne worshipped. Is that crazy bastard holding out for more? Or does he want stock? Thorne muttered, pacing back and forth in the room. No. Olivia's look when she returned wasn't the look of someone blackmailed. She looked as if she had just found a saint. A sense of unease crept into Thorne's mind, colder than the air conditioning blowing down from the ceiling. He knew Olivia wasn't a fool. If she had personally extended an invitation and been refused, yet still maintained that respectful attitude, then that mechanic certainly wasn't an ordinary person. He needed to know who his opponent was. Thorne returned to his desk, long, manicured fingers flying over the computer keyboard. He accessed the underground data system, opening the detailed background file on Lucas that the private investigator had just sent minutes ago. He skimmed over the harmless administrative information, his gaze stopping at the career history section. The line Lucas Miller, former chief engineer of Scuderia Ferrari racing team, Dynamics and Materials Division, appeared on the high-resolution screen, brilliant and sharp enough to make Thorne's spine go cold. He froze, staring blankly at the famous prancing horse logo of the Italian car manufacturer attached in the file. Memories of the F1 racing world rushed into his head. Ferrari didn't hire mediocrities. Ferrari's chief engineers were even more monsters in the mechanical industry. People obsessed with perfection to the extreme. People who could hear the engines moan at 18,000 revolutions per minute. Turns out to be a hidden monster, Thorne muttered, his voice trailing off, cold sweat starting to bead on his forehead. Now he understood why Lucas could detect the crack in the steering axle with just a small hammer. He understood why Olivia was completely convinced, and most dangerously, he understood Lucas was someone who couldn't be silenced with money. Those who stepped out of the F1 purgatory had sky-high self-esteem. They worshipped technique and precision more than life itself. If Olivia brought Lucas in, he wouldn't just be a new employee. He would be a judge, an executioner, and the first head he would want to chop off would be Marcus Thorne's, the one who approved the substandard steel batch to embezzle public funds. Fear began to invade Thorne, but the survival instinct of an old fox in the marketplace quickly rose up. He couldn't let Lucas set foot in Vance Motors. He had to destroy this threat in the egg before Olivia could return to persuade him a second time. But how to defeat someone indifferent to fame and profit? How to break the will of a man who refused a fortune? Thorne continued scrolling down, his eyes darting continuously like a predator looking for a weak point on the victim's body. And then he stopped at the family situation section. Son, Leo Miller, 10 years old. Diagnosis: severe autism, auditory sensory processing disorder. Care status: lives with father at the garage. Does not attend school, restricted living environment. A malicious, cruel smile slowly spread on Thorne's lips, stretching to his ears. He leaned back in the expensive leather chair, a soft laugh escaping his throat, sounding like a snake hissing. He had found it. The fatal weakness. The Achilles heel of the silent hero. You might be invulnerable to money, Lucas, Thorne whispered to Lucas's photo on the screen, but you are also just a father, blindly loving his child. In Thorne's head, perfect script was quickly drawn. He recalled the investigator's report about the glass room Lucas built for his son. In Lucas's eyes, it was a protective castle. But from the perspective of the law and hypocrites, it could be distorted into a prison cage. Without hesitating another second, Thorne picked up the desk phone, dialing a familiar number. On the other end was a corrupt high-ranking official at Child Protective Services, CPS, someone Thorne often nurtured with lavish vacations to solve troubles for the mistresses of big bosses. "Hello, Director Thorne? How can I help you?" The voice on the other end rang out fawningly. Thorne cleared his throat, immediately changing his tone. His voice became grave, worried, and full of fake concern to the point of creepy. "Hello? I am calling as a citizen concerned for the safety of a child. I just had the opportunity to do a field survey in a suburban area and accidentally witnessed a scene truly heartbreaking." He paused a moment for effect, then continued to spit out each venomous word. "I want to make an emergency report about a serious case of child abuse and neglect. A mechanic, showing signs of mental instability, is keeping his son in a cramped glass cage." "Yes, you heard me right. A glass cage placed right in the middle of a repair shop full of toxic chemicals, grease, and dust." Thorne glanced at the screen, reading aloud details about Leo's condition but distorting them. "The child suffers from severe autism, has no self-defense ability, and is completely isolated from society. I fear that if we do not intervene immediately, the child's life will be in danger due to exhaust gas poisoning or occupational accidents." The other end immediately bustled. "That's terrible. We will send a rapid response team down there immediately. Do you have the address?" "I will send the coordinates right now," Thorne replied, the corner of his mouth quirking up. "Do it by the book. Separate the child from that environment as soon as possible, for the child's benefit." "Certainly, sir. Thank you for reporting." Thorne hung up. The click of placing the receiver down sounded much more pleasant than Lucas's hammer sound. He stood up, walked to the liquor cabinet, pouring himself a glass of fine red wine. He swirled the glass gently, watching the red liquid ripple under the ceiling light, then stepped close to the glass window, looking down at the tiny city beneath his feet. His plan was cruel but also effective. When CPS raided and took Leo away, Lucas would collapse. He would have no mind left to meddle in car steering axles. He would have to scramble, beg, and at that time, Lucas would need money, a lot of money, to hire lawyers to reclaim his child. And the only person with money to save his life then would be Marcus Thorne again. He would turn Lucas from a potential enemy into an obedient dog, or drown him in the mud of despair. Thorne took a sip of wine, the sweet tartness spreading on the tip of his tongue. He raised the glass toward the void, in the direction of the dilapidated garage on the outskirts of the city. "You might be a genius with machines, Lucas. You might fool Olivia with those fake moral theories. But let's see what you do when I take away the most precious thing in your life. Welcome to hell, Mr. Chief Engineer." The afternoon at Rusty's garage passed with its usual gentle and familiar rhythm. Outside, it began to rain. Heavy drops pattered on the old corrugated iron roof, creating a monotonous background track that somehow brought a sense of safety to the father and son. Inside the shop, the smell of machine oil mixed with the scent of damp rain formed a flavor unique to days of diligent labor. Lucas was engrossed at his workbench, meticulously cleaning every detail of a classic carburetor, his hands moving rhythmically like an artist caring for his instrument. Occasionally, he would lift his eyes toward the corner of the shop, where warm yellow light spilled from the soundproof glass room. In that small world, Leo was immersed in absolute concentration. The boy arranged model cars in an order of color, shifting gradually from blue to deep red, perfect order that only he understood. The space inside the glass cage was completely separated from the noisy world outside. There was no thunder, no sound of rain, only pure silence, helping Leo's sensitive mind rest. Lucas smiled, a rare and relieved smile. He had just refused a fortune in exchange for this moment of peace, and he knew he had made the right decision. But that peace was as fragile as a dragonfly's wing before a storm. From afar, mixed within the sound of rain, was a strange noise, initially just small hums, but quickly growing louder, tearing through the rain screen and the silent space. It was the sound of sirens. Lucas froze, hand still holding the oily rag. He was more sensitive to sound than anyone, and that shrill, urgent frequency made his spine go cold. Not one car, but an entire convoy was rushing toward them. Patchy, red and blue flashing lights swept across the dusty windows, casting monstrous streaks of light onto the gray concrete walls. Tires screeched on the wet gravel right in front of the garage door. Before Lucas could gather his wits, the shop's rolling door was banged heavily from the outside. Bang! 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 The violent noise made Lucas jump. He hurriedly looked toward the glass room. Leo hadn't heard anything yet, thanks to the soundproofing, but the continuously flashing lights outside had made the boy look up, eyes wide with fear at the unusual change in lighting. The shop door was shoved open. Cold wind and rain poured in, carrying the chill of authority and oppression. A group of people in police uniforms and social workers with steely faces burst in like a flood. Dark raincoats, shiny badges, and their hostile attitude immediately turned the cozy garage into the scene of a serious crime. Lucas dropped the carburetor in his hand onto the ground. The metallic clash was swallowed by loud shouting. "Lucas Miller, I demand you stand still and raise your hands." A large police officer leading the group shouted, hand gripping a baton, eyes boring into Lucas as if he were a dangerous criminal just escaped from prison. Behind the officer, a middle-aged woman with thick-rimmed glasses and a cold face stepped up, holding a paper with a red stamp. It was an employee of Child Protective Services, CPS. She looked around the grease-filled shop, wrinkling her nose in disgust, then directed a sharp, cold gaze toward the glass cage where Leo was cowering. "We received a report of child abuse and unlawful imprisonment in a toxic environment," she declared, voice sharp as a razor, containing no human emotion. "We have an emergency court order to remove the child immediately." Lucas's heart seemed to stop beating. Abuse? Imprisonment? Those words rang in his head like a cruel joke. He understood immediately what was happening. This was not a mistake. This was revenge. The image of Marcus Thorne's fake smile appeared vividly in his mind. "You people are crazy!" Lucas screamed, fear turning into an outburst of anger. He rushed from the workbench, running hurriedly toward the glass room, spreading his arms wide to block the door like a mother hen bristling before a flock of hawks. "That is my son! He has autism and auditory sensory processing disorder. This is the safest place for him. Move aside!" The officer advanced, swinging the baton threateningly. "You are obstructing an officer on duty. This glass cage violates fire safety and environmental sanitation regulations. The child is being caged like an animal." "No! You don't understand!" Lucas yelled in despair, his voice cracking with horror. He saw the CPS woman signaling 2 other staff members to approach the glass room door with bolt cutters and lock-picking tools. "If you drag him out of the soundproof room without me, he will go insane. The outside world is too loud for him. Please, don't go near him." The plea of a father was drowned out by bureaucracy and prejudice. In their eyes, Lucas was just a crazy mechanic ruining a child's life. They didn't listen, or intentionally didn't listen. "Subdue the subject," the commander ordered. Immediately, 2 burly men rushed in. Lucas tried to struggle. The strength of hands that once lifted engine blocks, weighing hundreds of pounds, now poured entirely into the effort to push back the intruders. But he couldn't fight the many. A hard shove to the stomach doubled him over, followed by a leg sweep that sent him crashing face down onto the cold, oil-slicked concrete floor. His face was pressed hard into a puddle of dirty water. The salty taste of tears mixed with the bitter taste of motor oil flooded his mouth. But Lucas didn't care about physical pain. He tried to lift his head, bloodshot eyes staring toward the glass room. "Don't open the door!" he screamed, a heart-rending cry echoing throughout the cramped space. Too late. The CPS woman yanked the door handle hard. The glass room door, the final fortress protecting Leo from the cruel world, was thrown wide open. In that very moment, hell descended upon the 10-year-old child. The world inside the glass cage, previously absolutely silent, suddenly shattered. The ear-piercing long siren wails, the sound of rain battering the roof, the loud shouting of police, the clashing of metal. All those chaotic sounds rushed in simultaneously, amplified 1,000 times through Leo's hypersensitive hearing. To a normal person, it was just noise. But to Leo, it was thousands of sharp needles stabbing straight into his eardrums, sledgehammers pounding down on his fragile brain. Leo let out a shrill scream, a cry not like a human voice, but like that of a small animal injured to the extreme. The boy dropped the model car in his hand, hands clapping tight over his ears, eyes squeezed shut, whole body curling up. Extreme panic caused Leo to lose behavioral control. He began to bang his head against the glass wall behind him, each hit hard and frantic, as if wanting to use physical pain to drown out the torture of sound. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of Leo's head hitting the glass rang out dryly, each noise like a knife stabbing through Lucas's heart and liver. "Leo, don't be scared. Daddy's here. Daddy's here," Lucas roared, trying to struggle under the weight of the two officers pinning him to the floor. He clawed at the cement floor until his fingers bled, trying to drag himself toward his son even a little bit. "Cover your ears, son. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." CPS staff rushed into the room, trying to drag Leo out, but the more they touched him, the more violently Leo struggled. The boy kicked, scratched, and screamed in a panic, unaware of his surroundings. They, who claimed to come to protect children, were now behaving like kidnappers, roughly dragging a crisis-stricken child out of his only shelter. "The child is severely agitated. Need to take him to the center for sedation immediately," the woman shouted over the rain. They dragged Leo out of the glass room, dragging the boy across the dirty floor to the van. Leo had no strength left to scream. He only had left choking whimpers in his throat, eyes wide and vacant, but filled with utter terror. The moment he was dragged past where Lucas lay, the eyes of father and son met. Time seemed to freeze. In Leo's clear, tear-filled eyes, Lucas didn't see blame. He only saw desperate pleading. That look seemed to ask, "Why didn't you protect me? Why did you let them hurt me?" That was the final knife blow finishing off Lucas's soul. The door of the van slammed shut, cutting the last thread of connection. The siren wailed again, this time sounding even more mournful. The vehicle sped off into the white rain screen, taking with it the mechanic's sole reason for living. The officer released Lucas, pulling his arms behind his back. A cold click rang out. The handcuffs locked tight around Lucas's wrists, freezing cold like his heart at this moment. Lucas struggled no more. He slumped onto the floor, letting mud and oil cover his face. Strength left his body, leaving behind a hollow shell. The glass room now stood wide open, empty and cold. Blue and red model cars lay scattered on the floor like fragments of a happy dream, just crushed under the heel of power and lies. Around him, the rain still fell steadily, but Lucas heard nothing anymore. His world had collapsed, and the remaining silence was scarier than any noise he had ever known. It was the silence of loss, of extreme loneliness, when stripped of the reason to exist. He lay there, motionless, while darkness slowly swallowed the small garage, once a paradise, now turned into the grave, burying his family's happiness. The holding cell of the city police department was bathed in a pale, cold white light emanating from an old fluorescent bulb on the ceiling. The air here was thick with the smell of cheap antiseptic, mixed with the musty odor of peeling concrete walls, creating a suffocating atmosphere that could strangle anyone's will. But for Lucas, this physical confinement was nothing compared to the mental prison he was locked in. He sat huddled in the darkest corner of the room, back, leaning against the freezing wall, bloodshot eyes staring blankly into the indeterminate void ahead. In his head right now, there was no concept of time. He didn't know how long he had been sitting here, 1 hour, 2 hours, or a century. All that remained in his mind was the final image of Leo. His son's shrill scream as he was dragged away, the panicked look pleading for help through the rain screen, and the heart-rending siren of the police car. Those sounds kept repeating like a broken tape, torturing his nerves, causing every cell in his body to ache as if rubbed with salt. He felt helpless, the extreme helplessness of a father unable to protect his fragile child from the claws of a cruel system. The sound of high heels striking the cold tiled floor rang out from the hallway, breaking the deadly silence. That sound was sharp, concise, and full of authority, completely out of tune in this place of criminal detention. Lucas didn't bother to look up. He knew who it was. Only one woman could walk in here with that demeanor At midnight, Olivia Vance stopped in front of the iron bars. She was still wearing the luxurious suit from the afternoon, but her usual perfect grooming had vanished. Her hair had a few loose strands, her lightly made-up face clearly showing fatigue and remorse. She looked at the man huddled in the darkness, her heart constricting with a heavy sense of guilt. She had investigated, knew everything, and that truth made her feel disgusted with the very empire she was running. Why would an F1 legend accept such humiliation? Olivia spoke up, her voice trembling, breaking the heavy silence. Her question carried no implication of blame, but contained pity and incomprehension. She couldn't imagine someone who once stood at the peak of fame, directing a world-leading technical team at Ferrari, accepting to cower in a filthy garage and let lowlifes trample on his self-esteem. Lucas slowly looked up. His gaze met hers, and Olivia shuddered. It was not the look of a defeated man, but the look of a wounded beast, eyeing its enemy with extreme hatred. His voice rang out hoarse, as if his throat had been scorched dry by pain. My wife died because of a bureaucratic medical system. She was in a traffic accident, a serious injury, but completely savable if operated on in time. But they made me fill out 15 different forms, wait for insurance confirmation, wait for the signature of the department head, who was in a meeting. I knelt down and begged them. I screamed that I had money, who I was, but they just looked at me with emotionless eyes and pointed to the procedure. He gave a faint laugh, a twisted smile full of bitterness. She breathed her last on a cold stretcher right in the hospital corridor, while responsible people were still arguing about who signed the surgery order. Since that day, I realized that the flashy systems this society builds, whether medical or legal, are giant machines crushing human beings. Now, history is repeating itself. My child was taken away because of a blind legal system, manipulated by people with money like you. Lucas stood up, rushing toward the iron bars, hands gripping the cold metal bars until his knuckles turned white. He looked straight into Olivia's face, the distance between them just a few centimeters of steel. Thorne knows Leo's weakness. He gritted out each word, voice containing terrible fury. He investigated the boy's medical records. He knows well Leo has severe auditory sensory processing disorder. To him, the noise of the outside world is no different from physical torture. He knows without me by his side to reassure him, without a quiet space to recover, Leo will fall into a state of extreme agitation. Lucas swallowed hard, trying to suppress the surging emotion. And when the boy panics, screams, and trashes around, what will those diligent social workers do? They won't hug him. They will consider him a danger. They will tie him to a hospital bed and inject high-dose sedatives to silence him. Thorne knows that. He is calculating every step. He is killing my child bit by bit, suffocating his mind in a nightmare of chemicals and fear. He leaned his face close to the bars, fiery eyes boring deep into Olivia's soul. All of that just to hide your pile of scrap steel, just to protect Vance Motors' third-quarter profits. How much is a 10-year-old child's life worth in your financial report, huh, Olivia? Every word of Lucas was like a sharp knife, stabbing straight into Olivia's heart. She stepped back a pace, breathing heavily. She clenched her hands, fingernails digging deep into her flesh until they bled, but she felt no pain. This physical pain was nothing compared to the shame and regret burning her soul. She realized that her heartlessness, her lax management, and obsession with growth figures had created the perfect environment for monsters like Marcus Thorne to breed. She had indirectly aided evil, turning a corporation that was once her ancestors' pride into a cold-blooded killing machine. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her inherent composure. She knew that at this moment, sentimentality wouldn't solve the problem. Lucas didn't need her pity. He needed an ally, someone with enough power to break the iron cage imprisoning both him and his son. "Help me overthrow him," Olivia said, her voice ringing out solidly, no longer trembling. This was the first time in her life the queen of the automotive industry humbled herself to beg a mechanic. But in that plea was an iron determination. She stepped closer to the bars, looking straight into Lucas's eyes with absolute sincerity. "I cannot change the past. I cannot bring your wife back to life, but I can change Leo's future. I swear on the honor of a mother. Even though I have never given birth, I understand your pain. I will use all my power, money, and connections to bring Leo back. I will make Thorne pay for every drop of the boy's tears, and after everything is over, I will personally come before Leo to apologize." Olivia signaled the police chief standing fawningly at the end of the hall. He hurriedly ran over, holding a bunch of keys, sweating profusely. A special bail order had been signed, and with Olivia Vance's presence, no administrative procedure dared to stand in the way. The clack of the lock rang out, dry, but the sweetest sound Lucas had ever heard. The heavy iron door groaned open. Lucas stepped out of the cell. The moment he crossed the threshold, a strange change occurred. The collapsed, suffering man from just now seemed to have disappeared. Lucas stood up straight, stretching to shake off the fatigue and dust of the prison. He smoothed back his messy hair. His eyes, bloodshot from crying for his son, now became sharp, cold, and terrifyingly calm. It was no longer the look of a desperate father, but the look of a chief engineer standing before a seriously malfunctioning machine. He saw the problem clearly, saw the cause clearly, and most importantly, he knew exactly which part to cut out to fix it. Lucas turned to look at Olivia, speaking no hollow words of thanks. Between them, a tacit pact had formed, an alliance forged in blood and tears. "Let's go," he said briefly, his voice cold as the sound of metal clashing. "We have a tumor to operate on." Both walked side by side along the long, dark corridor of the police station. The sound of Olivia's heels and Lucas's steady footsteps merged, creating a threatening rhythm. Outside, the rain had stopped. The first light of dawn was glimmering on the horizon, signaling the start of a new day. But for Marcus Thorne and those hiding in the shadows of Vance Motors, today would be their day of reckoning. The world's sharpest scalpel had been unsheathed, and it was finding its way to the location of the malignant cancer eating away at this empire. Vance Motors' boardroom was situated on the highest floor of the tower, likened to the Olympus of the automotive industry. The interior exuded a cold luxury, with glossy black oak-paneled walls, a giant oval table, and artful lighting designed to celebrate power. At the head of the table, Marcus Thorne stood tall, holding a presentation clicker, radiating the confident demeanor of a king dispensing truth to his subjects. On the large screen behind him were lush green growth charts and profit figures meticulously painted, completely covering up the rot festering beneath the foundation. Today was the annual shareholder meeting, the most important event of the year, gathering financial tycoons and fierce investors. Thorne knew that if he just passed this hurdle, his position would become impregnable. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie knot, and spoke in a deep, persuasive voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I understand the recent concerns regarding a few minor incidents related to the steering system, but I affirm to you, this is absolutely not a design flaw or an error in our state-of-the-art production line. The internal investigation has pointed out the true cause." He clicked to the next slide. The screen displayed an image of a dilapidated garage, secretly taken from an angle that made it look as sleazy and suspicious as possible. The accident was due to the crude intervention of nameless mechanics, people lacking qualifications but possessing an excess of recklessness who arbitrarily replaced genuine parts with floating market goods. "We are victims of our own customers' ignorance when they hand over expensive cars to mechanical quacks." Thorne smirked, seeing nods of agreement from the shareholders. He was winning. He was manipulating the truth perfectly. But just as the triumphant smile blossomed on his lips, a terrifying noise rang out, tearing apart that fake solemn atmosphere. Wham! The thick, heavy oak door, designed to isolate all noise from the outside world, was shoved open with such violent force it was as if a storm had just hit. The door slammed into the wall, creating a shock that made the whole room jump. All eyes turned toward the entrance, where two silhouettes stood backlit and imposing. Olivia Vance entered first, her aura colder and more majestic than ever. She no longer bore the remorse of the previous night. In its place was the decisiveness of a queen returning to reclaim her throne. But what made everyone in the room, including Thorne, hold their breath in astonishment was not her appearance, but what was moving behind her. Lucas, the mechanic Thorne had just slandered, was pushing a heavy utility cart. On it was a block of pitch-black, clunky steel, covered in grease, completely out of place in this luxurious meeting room. It was a small industrial hydraulic press, something usually only seen in dusty mechanical workshops, now bravely brazenly present on the expensive wool carpet imported from Persia. Thorne was stunned for a moment, then anger flared up to replace astonishment. He slammed his hand on the table, roaring, "What the hell are you doing, Olivia? This is a shareholder meeting, not a flea market, and who authorized this ragged beggar to set foot in here?" He intended to rush down from the podium to call security, but his steps faltered. Lucas had stopped the cart right in the middle of the aisle, raising his head to look straight at him. The former Ferrari chief engineer's gaze contained no explosive anger. Instead, it was cold, deep, and deadly, like the barrel of a professional assassin's gun. That look sent a chill down Thorne's spine. The smile on his lips died out, strangled right in his throat. "I'm here to teach you the first lesson in mechanics, Thorne." Lucas's voice rang out, not loud but distinct, cutting through the murmuring noise of the crowd. He didn't care about the scrutinizing eyes, the gossip about the cheap clothes he was wearing. He calmly lifted a shiny steering axle from his bag, the exact type installed on the latest Vance Motors line, and placed it neatly onto the press bed of the hydraulic machine. Thorne panicked, shouting loudly, "Security! Where is security? Throw this criminal out immediately. He is a child kidnapper, a dangerous lunatic." Several large security guards were about to rush in, but Olivia raised her hand, a decisive gesture stopping them all. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice echoing throughout the auditorium, her authority completely overwhelming Thorne's hysteria. "I am the chairwoman of the board, and I order you to stand down. This is my witness. Let him do his job." The room fell into absolute silence. The power of the Vance family remained unchallenged. The security guards stepped back, leaving Lucas and the press to dominate the stage. Lucas bent down, plugging the cord into a floor socket. A low hum of the electric motor rang out. In the quiet space of the meeting room, that sound heard like the countdown of a time bomb or the sound of the Grim Reaper sharpening his scythe. It was rough, realistic, and scarier than any flowery words. He stood up straight, placing his hand on the control lever, his gaze sweeping once over the shareholders sitting neatly in expensive suits. "Ladies and gentlemen, in my hand is the A450 model steering axle, the core component in the steering system of the Vance luxury line you are proud of. According to the technical documents Director Thorne approved and sent for inspection, this grade A+ steel bar is designed to withstand a minimum compression pressure of 10 tons without deformation. That is the mandatory safety standard to ensure the car does not snap its axle while running at high speeds." Lucas paused for a moment, his eyes stopping on Thorne's bloodless face. "If it breaks below that level, even just at 1 ton, then the car you are selling is not a means of transport. It is a mobile coffin. And you, the people sitting here receiving dividends, are accomplices to murder." Lucas's declaration was like a bucket of cold water splashed straight into everyone's faces. Suspicion began to creep into the shareholders' eyes. They looked at Thorne, waiting for a rebuttal, but what they got in return was only the fearful silence of the production director. Sweat poured down Thorne's forehead like a bath, running down his pristine white shirt collar. He knew better than anyone what Lucas was placing on the press. It wasn't A+ steel. It was recycled grade C steel, mixed with lead, a cheap alloy with a hollow structure that he had used to siphon off millions of dollars. Lucas didn't give Thorne time to breathe or invent any more lies. He pulled the lever. Clack. The piston of the hydraulic press began to move down, slowly and ruthlessly. The black steel platen lowered gradually, pressing tight onto the fragile steering axle lying underneath. The engine growled louder as the pressure began to build. Every eye was glued to the pressure gauge mounted on the machine body. The red needle began to inch away from 0. 1 ton. The steel bar remained impassive, shiny under the crystal chandelier light. 2 tons. Still nothing happened. Thorne began to exhale, his chest heaving violently. He clung to a final fragile ray of hope. Maybe this steel batch was better than he thought. Maybe it would withstand 5 tons. Just passing the 5-ton mark, he could gloss over it as a technical margin of error. He could blame Lucas's machine for inaccuracy. Hope for survival, for blind luck, made him open his eyes wide, staring at the steel bar as if wanting to use his will to reinforce it. The needle continued to inch up, slowly, tensely. 2.5 tons. The space was so quiet, one could hear hearts pounding in chests. Lucas maintained a cold face, hand gripping the lever tight, showing no mercy. He knew the exact limit of this trash material. He didn't need to look at the gauge. He listened to the metal's moan. 3 tons. Just as the needle touched the number 3, a sound rang out. Crack. It wasn't as loud as a gunshot, not as noisy as a bomb explosion. It was a small, dry, and crisp sound, like the snap of a dry twig in a desolate forest. But in the absolute silence of the meeting room, that sound rang out like a thunderclap striking close to the ear. Thorne froze. The whole auditorium held its breath. On the shiny surface of the steering axle, right at the main stress point, a hair-thin crack appeared, then quickly spread out like a spider web. The collapse had begun, not at 10 tons as committed, but only at a cheap 3-ton level. The naked truth had been exposed right before the eyes of dozens of the most powerful witnesses, and no excuse could save the situation anymore. That tiny crack was merely the prelude to a symphony of destruction. In the vast and luxurious meeting room, time seemed to slow to a suffocating crawl. All eyes were glued to the hairline crack, spreading rapidly across the shiny steel bar's surface. Lucas held his pose, his calloused hand resting on the hydraulic press control lever with unshakable determination. He didn't look at the steel bar, but stared straight into Marcus Thorne's wide, terror-filled eyes. "Lead aluminum alloy," Lucas said, his voice deep and clear, echoing amidst the deadly silence of the auditorium. To reduce costs and fake the weight of real steel, you added lead to recycled aluminum alloy. It makes the surface shiny and easy to machine, but completely alters the crystal structure of the material. It's hard, yes, but it's a dead hardness. It's as brittle as glass. Lucas's technical explanation had just finished when the pressure gauge needle hit the 4-ton mark, a ridiculous number compared to the 10-ton standard. But destiny was sealed at that number. Bang! A jarring explosion rang out, tearing through the quiet space, sounding like a cannon firing right next to the ear. The whole room shook. The noble shareholders jumped, some instinctively ducking under tables in fear. The steering axle, Thorne's deceitful pride, did not bend or deform gradually. It exploded. It shattered into dozens of sharp fragments, spraying against the press's protective glass cage, creating chilling, clinking sounds like hail. Without the thick acrylic glass Lucas had carefully installed around the press, those shards could have embedded themselves in bystanders, causing serious injury. Inside the machine cage, the scene looked pathetic. The flashy steel bar was now just a pile of debris. More importantly, at those shattered cross-sections, the naked truth was exposed. There was no metallic luster of solid forged steel. Instead, there was a dull, gray color with countless tiny honeycomb-like air pockets. It was the structure of a rotten, cheap, and weak metal. The whole meeting room gasped in horror. Murmurs erupted like a broken beehive. Shareholders pointed at the scrap pile, their faces shifting from suspicion to extreme anger. They realized they had almost aided a disaster, and their own lives had been threatened, sitting in cars assembled from this garbage. Marcus Thorne stood frozen on the podium, face drained of all blood. He trembled, lips moving, wanting to say something to justify, but his throat seized up. The truth lay right there, shattered and obvious. No lie could cover it up anymore. He stepped back, intending to find a way to flee out the back door. But Olivia Vance was faster. She stepped onto the podium, snatching the microphone, her fiery gaze sweeping across the entire board. She pressed the remote button in her hand. The large screen behind immediately changed. No longer fake growth charts, but instead a series of bank statements, secret transfer orders, and diagrams of illegal cash flows. This is proof of the $50 million Marcus Thorne embezzled over the past 3 years by swapping material suppliers. Olivia's voice rang out steely, each word like a hammer, driving nails into the coffin of Thorne's career. He gambled Vance Motors' century-old reputation and the lives of millions of customers just to fill his greedy pockets. And worse, he used dark power to harm an innocent child to hide this crime. The meeting room door opened once again. This time not a mechanic, but men in black suits with shiny FBI badges on their lapels. They walked straight toward Thorne. The once powerful production director now looked shrunk and pathetic like a sewer rat cornered. The cold click of handcuffs rang out, locking the hands that had signed death contracts. Thorne was dragged away amidst the contemptuous and furious gazes of those who once hailed him. Amidst that storm of justice and punishment, Lucas stood silently by the press. He didn't look after Thorne, didn't smile in victory, nor did he care about the admiring or apologetic looks directed at him. To him, this play had ended. He slowly reached out to flip the power switch. The press engine's hum faded and died out completely. He wiped his hands, dusty with metal filings, on his pants, then turned to look at Olivia, who stood at the peak of newly re-established power. Lucas's gaze held no more hostility, but not yet complete trust either. It contained a single, urgent, and sacred request above everything else in the world. "It's done," he said briefly, voice hoarse with fatigue but full of weight. "Now, bring my son back." Olivia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She stepped down from the podium, approaching Lucas, and made the firmest promise of her life. "The car is waiting downstairs. Let's go pick up Leo." That night, at the Social Services Center, a tearful reunion took place. When the isolation room door opened, Leo rushed into his father's arms, trembling and scared. Lucas hugged his son tight, inhaling the familiar scent of his hair, feeling the child's racing heart gradually stabilize in his arms. No words were needed, only the sacred silence of fatherhood healing the heart's wounds. Olivia watched from afar, silently wiping tears, knowing she had much work to do to atone for her mistakes. 6 months later, the wasteland next to Lucas's old garage had disappeared. In its place was a modern building, with unique architecture, covered in soothing greenery, and the world's most advanced, soundproof glass system. The large sign at the gate read solemnly, "Vance, Miller Engineering Research and Rehabilitation Center." This was the apology and tribute Olivia dedicated to the father and son. The lower floor was a super-durable materials research center, where Lucas had full leadership authority as technical director, with equipment even Ferrari would dream of. The upper floor was a special space designed specifically for autistic children, with sensory rooms, therapy gardens, and absolute sound control systems. The opening day was cozy and simple. No champagne or loud fireworks, only close associates and gentle laughter. Lucas stood on the balcony, looking down at the lush green lawn where Leo was running happily with a few other children. For the first time in many years, he saw his son smile, a radiant smile under the sun without fear of any noise. Maya, the veteran reporter who had followed the Vance Motors scandal from the early days, stepped up beside him. She looked at the weathered man in a neat suit who couldn't hide the rugged look of a racer. "Lucas," Maya asked, her voice containing sincere curiosity, "you used to be the chief engineer of the most prestigious racing team on the planet. You lived in the roar of V12 engines, in the extreme excitement of 300 kilometers per hour speeds. Now, standing in this quiet place, doing silent research work, do you miss the feeling of speed on the F1 track?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his hands once stained pitch black with grease, once holding wrenches fixing tractors, once tightened by handcuffs, and now clean, holding the future of an entire corporation. Then he looked up toward Leo. The boy was holding a paper airplane high, eyes sparkling with pure joy. Lucas smiled, a peaceful and relieved smile Maya had never seen on him before. He shook his head slightly. "No, Maya, I don't miss it." He looked far away, where the blue sky embraced the peace of the new day. In F1, it's all just a sprint. Whoever is faster, whoever is more reckless, wins. But this life is not a short lap to win a championship trophy. I am on my right track now. This track doesn't need speed. It needs endurance. It needs patience to listen to the tiniest sounds, courage to fix errors however deep hidden, and love to go to the end of the road. Lucas walked down to the yard, heading toward his son. Leo saw his dad and ran over, grabbing his large hand tightly. Father and son walked hand in hand under the golden sunlight, leaving behind the ghosts of the past. Their shadows stretched long on the grass, solid and inseparable. That was the most beautiful image of a victory, not on a podium, but in the heart of a father who had protected his child's world. There are stories that do not end at the moment the villain is handcuffed or when a billion-dollar contract is canceled. They only truly conclude when the truth remains intact. undistorted, and wounded souls find a peaceful harbor. Lucas did not become a hero because he was once a renowned Ferrari engineer, or because he won with the steel resolve of a hydraulic press. He became a hero simply because he was a father who chose to stand tall when every safe path and every monetary temptation demanded that he bow his head and remain silent. A seemingly small choice by a grimy mechanic, yet powerful enough to drag the naked truth into the light and cause the seemingly impregnable structure of lies, advanced motors, to collapse. If you have ever been looked down upon, simply because of your background or grease-stained appearance, ever been oppressed by larger forces, or ever had to suppress your pain to protect your loved ones, then this story belongs not only to Lucas, it reflects your own resilience somewhere in this life. Follow the channel to continue journeying with stories where hidden truths are exposed, where kindness is tested but never yields, and where just one person refusing to turn their back can overturn an entire unjust system. Hit subscribe right now so you will not miss the next episodes.